Today's date is January 30th, 2024. My name is Kelly Zakovic. I'm representing the City of Savannah Municipal Archives. I'm interviewing Virginia Edwards Maynor for the Savannah Community Memory Project. We're conducting this interview at the Liberty City Community Center. Thank you for joining us today. If we could go ahead and get started by having you introduce yourself and tell us what you're here to share with us today.
Okay, it's an honor for me to be here today to talk about a gentleman I call a pioneer man. As you said, my name is Virginia Edwards Maynor. I am a long-term resident of Savannah, and my history is I was formerly the principal of Duran Middle School, and then I served as superintendent of Savannah-Chatham County Public Schools from 1998 to 2001. And retired in 2001. Today, I'd like to share my thoughts about a man who had a profound impression and was a great supporter of mine during some very challenging times. And I deeply appreciate Reverend Benny R. Mitchell and his family for their support over the years. Reverend Mitchell, and the reason it's an honor for me to talk about him is because I think he just had such an impact on quite a few changes in our community. And I think that he is worthy of honorable mention. And hopefully at some point we will find that he is also worthy of having something that he did as a designation, an honorable designation for his contributions, which I'll talk about. As I said, I consider Reverend Mitchell a pioneer man. He was wise like Solomon, faithful like Abraham, and he was dedicated to a cause. One of the things sayings that I think is appropriate in describing him is that he believed in you build on what God has given you. And him being a spiritual person, a minister, this is what he did. He believed in doing and building on what God has given us to do. Reverend Mitchell was a resident of Liberty City community for over 20 years. And his son, Benny Mitchell and Jr. was a student at Duran Middle School in the 80s, during the time that I was principal. And the children who lived in Liberty City had to walk from Rockdale Street to 52nd and Hopkins Street. And it was a challenge for them because there was no sidewalk. Reverend Mitchell made it a mission to ensure that a sidewalk was constructed for the safety of the young children that walking to the school daily. That was just one example of what Reverend Mitchell sought to do to improve the quality of life in this community, not only for young people, but for even adults. I recall, if you don't mind, if I look at my notes here. That he served as pastor of Connors Temple Baptist Church for over 40 years. He was also instrumental in, in establishing the celebration for the Martin Luther King Jr. Day in Savannah. He worked with a group of young ladies, and they began the observance of Martin Luther King Day in Savannah. He was also instrumental in saving what was called the West Broad Street YMCA before it moved to May Street. He saved that building and brought it back to its original purpose, which was the McKelvey Powell renovation, which was like a USO club for the military people in the city. And he entitled his the movement as Building on Faith, which goes back to my saying that he believed that you build on what God has given you, and his saving the YMCA and restoring it to the McKelvey Powell building is an example of building on what God has given you. Reverend Mitchell was just a very active person in this community. People respected him because he not only spoke his mind, but he was true to his word and followed. Sometimes he could be quite controversial, but in the end, what he set out to do, he did for the betterment of all Savannahans. And I just think that he is most worthy of being recognized, not only for the sidewalk that he made sure happened for the safety of the children, but he was also a supporter of all youth activities. Even serving, sometimes he was considered a cheerleader for his son's athletic teams that his children participated in. So it's an honor for me to sit here today and bring to the attention of those who will view the video that Reverend Mitchell actually was a very active community activist, and he did it from the goodness of his heart. So this is what I think of Reverend Mitchell. If you have questions.
Sure. So I'll start. What years was Reverend Mitchell active in the community?
He started at Connor's Temple Church, and he was there for over 40 years. So I would say up until his death, and he died February 2011. And he's originally from South Carolina. So my relationship and knowledge of Reverend Mitchell spanned well over 30 years or more.
And how did you know him?
I knew Reverend Mitchell because of his ministry at Connor's Temple Baptist Church.
Is that where you attend?
No, I'm Presbyterian, but Reverend Mitchell has such a profound impact on the community that he connected with all faiths, people of all walks of life. And that was the beauty in that you didn't have to be a member of Connor's Temple. You could be a member of any church or any faith. If you called on Reverend Mitchell, he was there to help.
And I think I interrupted you, but how did you guys meet?
We met as I was principal of DeVry Middle School, where his son attended. And one day he had an occasion to come to the school on behalf of his son regarding an incident that had occurred. And so when I walked out of the office to meet Reverend Mitchell, he said to me, "Oh, now I see why my son enjoys coming to the school." So that was our first meeting. And from that point on, Reverend Mitchell became an active parent along with Mrs. Mitchell in all the school activities there and truly supported the school. I recall that at the end of the school year, when school would close, the high school kids got out early. And we had mentioned that sometimes the older kids would come down to the middle school and we would have to supervise the wings and make sure that the the kids from the high school didn't disrupt our school during the day. So Reverend Mitchell said, I can help with that as a part of the PTA. So what he did was he brought together at the end of the school year, he and some representatives from Local 1414, which is the longshoresman organization. And they helped us monitor our wings. And he worked so that the teachers could continue to teach and focus on the children. They did the monitoring of the school wings for us. So from that point on, we became friends. Reverend Mitchell and Mrs. Mitchell, we became friends.
And what was Mrs. Mitchell's name?
Betty Mitchell. And she was a former school teacher. She taught at White Bluff Elementary School, where she retired at that time.
The sidewalk out here, do you know what year that came to fruition?
It had to be around 84, 85, I believe. Somewhere within that time frame is when I think that may have occurred.
What would you consider one of his greatest achievements?
Working with the Martin Luther King Day, as well as his work with us at Duran Middle School, his interest in young people, and his activism as a civil rights advocate. Reverend Mitchell had, after the Martin Luther King Day, event would occur, he would have a faith organized meeting at the Savannah Civic Center, where all the clergy, politicians, and all would meet for a spiritual gathering. Reverend Mitchell was well known in the community, and it would behoove you to research him and read about all of his contributions, and especially the book that he has written, which is Building on Faith, A Labor of Love, which I will be happy to share a copy with you.
Yeah, thank you.
And his son has done a biographical of him, It Is Well With My Soul.
And where can people access that?
You can access it on YouTube and also on Prime Video, and I have some cards for you.
Perfect. Could you tell us more about the MLK Day celebration?
Well, mainly you had the MLK luncheon. The ladies and the MLK parade started with Reverend Mitchell and his support of that. He was a strong community activist. Yes, he was.
Do you know what year he got that started?
It was, I know, I'm not sure. I think it was in the 80s or 90s.
Are there any other activities that we should know that he was involved in?
I think the main, what impacts the most for me is how he reached out to ensure the safety of the young people who had to walk from Rockdale to Duran Middle School without a sidewalk, which was presented a safety hazard for them. And also his impact on the civil rights activities in the community.
Can you tell us more about his civil rights contributions?
Well, other than him establishing the Martin Luther King Day, which he is I don't think it's been given as much credit for that as he deserved to have had. I did not participate at that time in a great deal of those activities, but was more of a supporter and bystander as he moved about to make those events happen.
You mentioned that you'd like to see him recognized with a designation. How would you envision that?
Well, what I would envision is that the sidewalk from Rockdale to 52nd and Hopkins Street, where Duran Middle School is, would be an appropriate designation in his honor because of his interest, not only in young people, but ensuring that there was a certain quality of life for all individuals in this community.
Anything else that you'd like to share about him?
No, this is it.
Okay. Can I ask you a little bit more about the community, about yourself?
Okay.
Sure. Would you like to tell us about where you grew up?
I grew up in Can Park, Jackson Park neighborhood. We lived, I attended Alfred Beach High School, a 1963 graduate of Alfred Beach High. I attended Savannah State College, now university, and graduated in 1968. I taught school in South Carolina for a while, and then I returned home to Savannah and taught school at Kyler Junior High, Savannah High. I served as assistant principal at Jenkins High School. I also was a curriculum person for Windsor Forest High School, and eventually was promoted to principal at Duran Middle School. At one point in time, I did file equal opportunity lawsuit against the Savannah-Chatham County Board of Education for a position that I did not receive and had been highly qualified for. And the outcome of that was in my favor. And so I can say that I don't regret any of my time as an educator. I learned a lot. And when I retired in 2001, I retired with lots of lessons learned and much appreciation for the opportunity to have served the young people and families in this community for over 30 years. One of the things I will mention is that a part of my growing up in this community was the Greenbrier Children's Center. I don't know if you're familiar with Greenbrier, but Greenbrier was established as a residential home for African American children and families who were in need of a place, sometimes temporary and sometimes permanent, a permanent place for some of the young people. And prior to Greenbrier, opening, African American kids who had family issues and who were in need of a place were put in a brown farm in Cara Village, which was where they put prisoners. And they didn't have what you would call like a Bethesda and home to go to. Greenbrier became that for them. So this neighborhood had some landmarks worthy of mentioning. Also in the area, George K. Gannon was the first hero killed in World War II from Savannah. His family owned a grocery store, Gannon's, in the neighborhood. Also at the end of the Hopkins Street, where Clinch and Hopkins Street meet, where where Duran Middle School now is built, there was a pulp mill there. So, and then on the corner of Hopkins and 52nd Street, there was a service station owned by a minority, Mr. Brack. Then there was a restaurant called Willow Cove that was owned by the Jamesons. Also, we had a restaurant and a dry cleaner and a laundromat. So the community had, some presence of businesses and other kinds of, landmarks. So I don't know what else you.
Yeah. For the sake of the recording, where is Greenbrier located?
3709 Hopkins Street.
And the Ganem grocery store?
It was on Hopkins, at the corner of Hopkins, on Hopkins and 53rd. And also Walter Evans, the famed philanthropist and in this community, his family lived on 53rd Street, the Rakestraws. His mother was a Rakestraw. So he had some connection with the area as well.
We've had a lot of people talk to us about the Durin Elementary Middle School out here. Anything, could you talk about the school a little bit?
Well, as the principal of the school, quite naturally, I'm going to say it was one of the best middle schools in town. And the school population was the children from Liberty City, Cloverdale, Bel Air, and from the south side, the Windsor Forest area, and over where Savannah Mall is, Middle Ground Road, around in that area. Those were the students who attended Duran Middle School. And it was part of the desegregation plan where the schools had to integrate, and students who lived on the south side of town, middle school kids, were bused to Duran. And the children, when it was time to go to high school, the children who lived in Cloverdale, Bel Air, Liberty City, they were bused to Windsor Forest High. So they flipped it back forth. But Duran was considered one of the top middle schools in the school district. But it was difficult we used to have an attendance recognition monthly when we would go to our principal meetings. And so Duran would always win the perfect attendance banner. We also had Quiz Bowl. We were topped with the Quiz Bowl. So it was an excellent middle school, and I enjoyed being the principal of the middle school. And prior to that, I taught middle school. That was my favorite place to teach. I taught at Myers Middle School. That was the grade level that I enjoyed teaching. And most of all, when we had Georgia Day, we really put on a show to celebrate Georgia Day. So I hope I'm answering your question, but Duran was an outstanding school. Had some excellent teachers, dedicated teachers. It was a great and wonderful parents, supportive parents.
As part of the sort of desegregation initiative, how did that go for the school? Can you speak to it?
In what terms when you say?
Was there controversy? Was there pushback? Was it fairly smooth?
Well, there was controversy. In fact, the desegregation court order was done by Reverend Louis Scott Stell in the name of his son Ralph Stell. And the desegregation plan, it took quite some time for it to fulfill the requirements. I'm not an expert on the actual development of the plan, I can only speak to my experience with it as an observer and I won't say a beneficiary, but as a teacher in the school system, where quite naturally there was a racial issue regarding the desegregation plan. Quite naturally, that it was something that was new to white parents, black parents, and there was pushback. Quite naturally, white parents did not want to integrate in certain schools and in certain districts. So yes, there was pushback, absolutely. Marches. We're not just talking about the desegregation of schools, but even in the community where we couldn't shop. We could shop downtown, but we couldn't try on clothes. We had to take whatever you bought, hopefully it fit. We couldn't eat at the lunch counters. We had to integrate those. So the civil rights movement in Savannah not only was economic, it was social, as well as educational impact.
Thank you. Is there anything you'd like to share about growing up in Ken Park, Jackson Park area?
We were a unified neighborhood. Everybody looked out for each other. We were a truly connected neighborhood. Parents could leave their children at home and neighbors would watch for each other. It was a community a unified community of love, support. Relatives lived nearby. In my family, for an example, my father's sister, they lived around the corner from us. They had a washateria, the west side washateria. Well, they called it a washateria, but it was a laundromat. And we had a dry cleaner. It was Stevens Dry Cleaning. So it was a neighborhood of love, support. We didn't have to fear at night to have to lock our doors or take into some of the security issues that we have today. People lived freely, enjoyed one another. We enjoyed Can Park, which is what the neighborhood was named for. So I would say that I had a healthy exposure growing up in this neighborhood and in this community.
And what community do you live in now?
I live in Southbridge.
How would you say the community has sort of changed throughout your life?
Well, we've grown up, moved away from our roots, and the neighborhood has reinvented itself. When I ride through the neighborhood, I have memories, and I look at homes where people have passed away, children have moved on to other areas and interests. So the neighborhood, like any neighborhood, has gone through a transition, and it's not the same neighborhood. So, when I go through it, I just look at the homes that are now occupied by others or no longer exist. So it's sobering, there's some happy thoughts and then there's, mixed emotions. That's what best I can say that I have when I drive through the neighborhood.
Makes sense. Well, is there anything else that you'd like to share with us about the neighborhoods or Reverend Mitchell before we wrap up?
I would just say that, again, I would close by saying that Reverend Mitchell, I call him a pioneer man, a man who cared about this community, who dedicated his time, not only from the educational standpoint, but from the political standpoint. And he was involved in the community in a number of ways. As I said, he could be controversial, but in the end, what he set out to do was for the good, I think, of all people. And he is most deserving of some kind of recognition beyond what his son has done. And I think if you take the time to view the video and read the book, the video, It Is Well With My Soul, you will find out the true essence of the man that he was. So I would encourage you to do that. And it was an honor for me to be here just to speak on his behalf.
Yes, well, it's an honor for you to join us. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.